Next up, we have State Senator Patrick Gallivan, incumbent in the 59th Senate District. There we go, Senate District. Are you there, Senator Gallivan? There you are.
I think I am. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
always a pleasure to have you here. As always, you get your 2 or 3 minutes for open, and then we'll have some questions for you.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Good afternoon to Todd and Mark, who I see your almost smiling faces, and to everybody else, of course, who I can't see but is online with watching this with interest, I hope, because it's so important that people participate and people vote. So I certainly hope that that people are participating, and I encourage you to vote if you haven't. A lot more opportunity this year with absentees having been expanded with early voting, and then of course the old-fashioned way just on election day itself. I remain honored to represent the 59th district in the state Senate, to have the trust of the people to trust me to be their voice. The district includes southern Erie County, all of Wyoming, the northern part for the most part of Livingston County, and then a couple towns in the southern part of Monroe County. While we have district boundaries, I don't focus just on the district. I look to work for the community, being the voice of the roughly 300,000 people in the Senate district, and always try to make sure that I'm considering the larger Western New York community, which would include the greater Buffalo and the greater Rochester area, in my decision and in my votes. We're going through a lot right now. The pandemic, I think, overshadows everything. And obviously it's very concerning, first for people's health, and then secondly for the health of the businesses that employ all of the people in our community. I think we have real challenges there. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment. Separate from that, I'm concerned statewide about public safety, some of the changes in the laws and the negative impact it's had on public safety, given my background in law enforcement. And then, of course, our economy, which takes in many, many things, including the size and cost of government, some impediments to business, trying to help businesses succeed in creating opportunities for everybody so that there is employment and we can enjoy our lives and support ourselves and take advantages of what our country is and what our community is and what it's intended to be. The single biggest issue I think we face right now, though, is the pandemic in New York State governance. The governor has emergency powers. I think they have gone on for too long. We've seen unilateral implementation of some of the directives that have a direct impact on everybody, including all of those that rely in any way, shape, or form on funding from the state. We see a withholding of, in many particular cases, especially the not-for-profits, withholding of 20% of the money, a decision just made by the government, with the legislature standing by and not exerting its authority. And I think the legislature needs to stand up and exert its authority. We need to have more people standing up and trying to push on the legislative leaders to call us back and essentially to restore our government to the check and balance intended by the state constitution. I know you have a number of questions. I could continue to talk for a long, long time, but out of respect for everybody here, and then of course your process, I will try to answer, Todd, whatever questions you choose to ask, and address any other area that I haven't touched on yet.
I did want to give you a minute, because of your experience as a former Erie County Sheriff, what you thought of what changes you would think would be needed in the relationship with law enforcement. You know, people with disabilities have a high degree of interaction with law enforcement. And, you know, we're concerned about changes that might need to be made in law enforcement. But I'm very curious, as an ex-Erie County Sheriff, what you would agree needs to change.
Well, I would say, well, a lot needs to change, but I would put priority on on communications. Communications between law enforcement and the community. Interesting, Sir Robert Peel he's from England, and back in the 1800s, he's known as the father of modern day policing. One of the things he said, though, was that the police are the community and the community are the police. And that is something I've always believed in. And then when I was a police executive, as the sheriff, I tried to impart that upon the agency first and foremost. Now, we are way more complicated than what I'm going to say right now, but think back to the Andy Griffith show, Mayberry RFD. You've got a person in Andy Griffith, the sheriff, who cared about the community. And he tried to help people. He tried to engage with people. He treated everybody with respect and tried and listened to everybody. And he went about it trying to help the community and trying to keep people safe. He did it without disrespect. He did it with complete respect. And he also did it at the same time with cooperation of the community. Now, how do you do that with large agencies? How do you do it statewide? How do you do it nationwide? I think police training has to focus on communication skills. We do have a separate issue that has crept in during my career that has been very problematic, and that is what we've seen more and more mental health related issues attached to violations of law. And those, if we go back into the 80s and we saw, when we saw the closure of a lot of the mental health facilities and people being reintegrated back into society, the promise then was that there would be community-based services to help with that reintegration. And so that people could get the necessary services. And then, of course, we could live in communities side by side. The state failed on that. And what we then saw was for the people that didn't have somebody to love them or take care of them, make sure that they take their medicine, where did they go? Out on the streets, and where did they end up? In jails, which is certainly not the place for them. So I think police training does have to focus on personal communication skills. We have to have a lot more training for law enforcement in the area of mental health. And then, of course, they still do. That's not to simplify it, because there's still all these issues that they have to deal with, and they're very challenging issues. And for the police officer on the street, it's extremely challenging. But communication skills, first and foremost, I think are the most important.
I think, and that's a very important answer. Last question though for you, because believe it or not, the 10 minutes has flown right by. But as with all the previous candidates, we're going to send you questions that come in the feed to allow you and the campaign an opportunity to answer them. I can say for the record that you've always been very responsive to this stuff for us. But the last question we've got is with regard to healthcare, right? As a state senator, what can you do in the event that something bad happens to the Affordable Care Act? Getting a lot of questions about the Affordable Care Act all over the feeds today for all the candidates. And I know it's a federal issue, but if in the event something bad happens to that, what do you see your role as a state senator being?
If I'm not mistaken, the legislature in the state essentially codified a number of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act in New York state law, just in the event that didn't take place. Now, I may be mistaken about that, but I think that that it was something that was passed in sometime in the past one or two sessions of the legislature. But putting that aside, I think that New York State has done well in access to healthcare and trying to reach people. I think that we are now pre-pandemic, and I don't know what's taken place over the past several months, but I think that we were over 95%, or about 95% of people had some form of coverage. The work, of course, should be to identify and connect with those who don't have the coverage to make sure it's available. Now, when it's available, we have to have it accessible. It has to be quality care. It just can't be care for the sake of care, and it has to be affordable. Some of the people that are in that 4 or 5% that don't have care don't have the care because they choose not to, but because they choose not to, because it's not affordable to them. The young professional, right? The person in the 20s, early 30s without a family that's invincible and looks at the high cost of care and what their co-payments might be. But I think we have to focus on those things, making sure that healthcare is available for everybody, accessible. It's available and accessible for everybody, that it's quality and that it's affordable. And I do think New York State is ahead because of the legislation passed, is ahead of most states in that regard. In the event the federal government says, okay, out the door. Not so simple in New York because it's been codified, I believe.
Wonderful. That's a great answer and a great ending to our time together. Senator Gallivan, we thank you very much for coming today. Wish you best of luck in your campaign.
Thanks, Todd and Mark.
I know this isn't
everybody.
the last time we're going to see each other, so until we meet again, stay safe.
Yes.
You as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.